I'm actually going to start somewhere where you probably don't expect it to start. Hello, hello. We have Benjamin Wong, who is an environmental artist, activist, and a speaker.
Actually, being an environmentalist is very much the opposite of influencer culture.
We are creating our own reality, always. And it's not just this lifetime, it's multiple lifetimes.
Where we choose to start and end a story determines whether or not that story was like a success or a failure.
Ultimately, there is no such thing as what they call eco-friendly industry.
But it is not my job, singularly as an artist, to change the hearts and minds of the entire world. Like, it's just not going to happen. It is so much easier to talk about what's wrong with the world rather than talking about what's potentially right with the world.
Exactly. It's such a beautiful piece, Ben. It's stunning.
I think good garbage is garbage that becomes a net positive.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? Hello, hello. We have Benjamin Wong, who is an environmental artist, activist, and a speaker on the show today. Thank you, Ben, for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I'm actually going to start somewhere where you probably don't expect it to start. I have spent a decent amount of time in the Penang area of Malaysia, and I found that the Malaysian Chinese were a very interesting lot and extremely entrepreneurial because, this whole transition that happened from China and, of course, the way they built Malaysia. So, do you think your heritage had something to do with the way you think now?
It's an interesting question because I couldn't be any more different than my parents. Like, my dad has been in the same job for 35 years. My mom is a stay-at-home mother, and they're both really anti-risk. They're like really want to lead safe, stable lives. Like, I think my mom is still waiting for me to get a real job. And so growing up, even though my parents really encouraged us to have a lot of extracurricular activities, there was very much this foundational expectation that we would go get a job, get married, have kids, and like lead a normal life. And turns out I just really didn't go down that pathway. That being said, I do think like my parents did a really good job of creating a very safe nest egg. There was this really interesting conversation that I had a while back. My mom and my dad were arguing about my future. And my dad said to my mom something to the effect of like, the reason we work so hard was to give our kids a chance to do things that we would never be able to do. And so I think in some ways, I don't really know about like the cultural heritage piece of it. I have a fair bit of distance between myself and my heritage, but I do think my parents did a really great job of creating a foundation that would enable me to take bigger risks and to sort of think creatively about what life worth living looks like.
And were you always this way? Were you just born this way in terms of thinking differently and being your own person? Or did it evolve as you were growing up?
No, honestly, when I was young, I was basically a stereotypical Asian kid. I was good at math and physics. I played the violin. I did martial arts. I was a very mediocre student. Like, I was like a solid B plus kind of kid. I was never like top of my class or anything. And so growing up, I think my parents were just kind of like, all right, well, Ben's just going to be an average dude. And I think even like myself, like, when I was 18, like entering university, I was just doing what everyone else was doing, playing video games. I think I had this like idea that maybe it would be cool to be a truck driver where I could like drive trucks 6 months out of the year and then play video games the other 6 months of the year, or some kind of seasonal work. And so there's never any inkling as I was young that like anything particularly interesting was going to happen in my life.
Yeah, that career would have definitely driven your parents up the wall, driving trucks and playing video games. That would have
Yeah,
been
I know.
fun to see. If you think now is bad, what would that have been like?
Well, I don't know. I mean, these days you have these Twitch streamers that are like having these amazing careers. So you never know. The world's a weird
You never
place.
know. So you go along and you kind of do an engineering degree. And why did you end up choosing mining? And, like, how did that kind of shape your personality?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Montreal, Canada. So in Canada, mining and materials engineering was one of like the major verticals of engineering that you could pick. And when I went to open house, I was 16 years old. I went to like a university open house, and I was good at math and physics. I didn't really know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so my dad was an engineer, and I was like, I guess I'm just going to try mechanical or electrical or one of these. And the mining and materials engineering guys just had the best sales pitch. They said, you get to travel, you have a guaranteed job, you are going to be able to have a higher salary than everyone else, you have smaller classrooms. I was like, oh, this sounds amazing. And I just like hopped into the job. It was just a thing to do. And while I was there, we had these work terms. So it would be like 8 months of school, 4 months of work, 8 months of school, 4 months of work, and so forth. And that gave me the opportunity to go work in a couple different companies and mine sites and so forth. And I just, obviously now looking back, I'm like, well, mines aren't exactly in the most metropolitan areas. So yes, you get to travel, but you're in the middle of nowhere. And so very quickly, even before graduating, I was like, I don't think this is the right thing for me. But because I had already like completed most of my schooling, my mom was like, you can't just start something and then change. You have to start something and you have to finish it. And I didn't really have anything better to do when I graduated. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to go work, and ended up doing that for 3.5 years.
And was the artist in you always present as you were growing up, or was it something that you discovered suddenly?
So the art thing was also a mistake, as with most of my life. This one specifically was while I was working in a mine in Winnemucca, Nevada, which is like an hour away from Burning Man, just to tell you how remote and in the middle of nowhere it is. A girl breaks up with me, and I'm like, I need to find something to do, otherwise I'm going to go crazy. So I end up buying a camera and deciding to take pictures of the stars, because the stars are really beautiful out there. And I teach myself how to use a camera. And that's like kind of the first thing that I pick up that I really enjoy. I find community. I actually happen to be pretty decent at it. I think it's a combination of being an art form that is both technical and creative, right? Like the machine does a lot of the work. And so if you understand the machine, you get the opportunity to control that in some creative and interesting ways. That was really the first hint that there was something interesting there. And I still remember after 9 months since buying my first camera, I was in a photo club and someone couldn't make a job, and they offered the opportunity to me, and they were like, hey, would you like to go and photograph this party, this event? I was like, wait, I get to get paid to go have fun? Like, this is so foreign to me. Like, how is this possible? And the money that I earned from that, I just started recycling back into my hobby, and I started doing more and more jobs. And it just became this sort of flywheel that was like, oh, you get the chance to do something you enjoy and get paid for it. And this was something I had never touched upon when I was younger. It always felt like there was work and then there was play. There's never like these two things didn't fuse together. And the ability to fuse those things, two things together, just really opened up a whole new world of possibility.
As you were speaking, I was reminded of two things. One was that I just started reading this book last night, and it's called Atmosphere. And it basically starts with this idea of the stars, and literally, how that kind of shapes us when you actually gaze at the stars and you kind of understand your own existence. The second one is my older daughter. She declared at age 8 that she only wants to work with the camera. That's it. And we were like, she's a kid, she'll get over it. And today she's studying film in New York, and she's very clear. All I'm going to do is cinematography. This is it. Like I'm studying film, and she's a great story writer and a great speaker as well. But she's so clear that I'm only interested in the camera. That's it. So it's so fascinating to watch that happen. So then, of course, you also do funky things like the flicker underwater shoot. How does that happen? Because that's pretty big. Then going from this hobbyist who's getting odd jobs to kind of getting into this very very special kind of photography. So how did that evolve?
Yeah, I think I always had a desire for attention, right? Like at some level, if you're going to become a freelancer, which your daughter, I guess, will soon learn, it doesn't matter how good you are if people don't know that you exist. And so you need to somehow be capable of marketing yourself and getting yourself out there into the world. And earlier on, I discovered that if you collaborated with more people, and this is right at the dawn of Facebook, like pre-algorithm, Instagram didn't even exist yet, but like, if in like 2008, 2009, if you took a photo and you put it on Facebook, the more people you tagged in the photo, the more people would discover it by association. And so was very much an incentive for collaboration. And so earlier on, I was doing these collaborations that would invite you to sort of push the boundaries of what was possible. The crazier the thing that you did, the more attention it would get. Along the way, I started documenting the process of like how I did these projects. And I realized that actually people are a lot more interested in a photograph when they know that there's something real behind it, because, at the time, Photoshop was also just getting more and more popular. And there was really this appreciation for things that were still done in reality. And so I started leaning into a lot of special effects in my work. And if you just keep pulling on that thread of like, okay, you need to do things that are crazier and crazier with more and more interesting people that attract more and more attention, then sooner or later the size of the project just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I kind of had this approach of really not being scared of trying things, even if I didn't know how to do them. I would just come up with like a base concept of an idea, find the people that were smarter than me, that knew how to pull this off, and collaborate with them. And that allowed me, I think, in many ways to like leapfrog. I think photographers have a sort of unfair advantage in some ways. Like you can take the work of like a really good model, a really good makeup artist, a really good clothing designer, a really beautiful location. You can borrow all these pieces of expertise and you can package it and deliver the final result. And then you kind of gain the credit for all of that. You build because you control the final result. I think maybe a film director is sort of the same. Like you're building a team. And so the art of photography, at least the kind of photography that I was doing, which was like production based, is really the art of collaboration. And that was really the thing that I practiced. And so anytime I would find myself in an interesting scenario, I would generally think like, how could I make this into an interesting photo shoot? And so the photo shoot that you're referencing, which happened while I was on vacation with my parents in Bali, I decided to get a dive certification because I wanted my vacation to be productive. And I just thought that if I was going to be getting a dive certification, then I should find a way of making that into a photo shoot. And if I wanted to do a photo shoot, then there needed something to shoot. Turns out there was a shipwreck. And then I started posting on Facebook looking for a model. Someone flew in from Dubai to be a part of this project. We found a local makeup artist. We found a dive team that would be doing this. And so like, I basically did this underwater photo shoot in a shipwreck in Bali the day after I got my dive certification. But was I uniquely qualified to do it? Not really. But I had like a team of people who were really qualified that helped to make it happen, which is funny because in theory, nothing was preventing them from doing this without me, right? Like I was maybe the least important piece of the puzzle, except that I was also the most important piece of the puzzle because without me, the incentive to do all of this stuff wouldn't have happened. And so I think that's the role that I've consistently played over the course of my life is like, oh, what is the dumb idea that everyone can do, but no one has really thought of doing or wanted to put in the effort of doing or wanted to gather the right people around them to do it.
Yeah, you definitely made that holiday very productive for sure. If you managed to do so much, okay, a photo shoot, a dive course is a different thing, but doing it at this scale is of course interesting. So how does the transition, you are a successful photographer, how do you decide to transition to sculpture? And was there training involved in that, or was it just something that was coming from within and had to be expressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think as with all of my transitions, I have an idea and I don't really know how to get there, but I just sort of put it out into the world and I keep doing it with the resources I have available until it becomes sort of mainstream. So, if I just rewind a little bit to give an example of how often this has happened, I started off as an event photographer. And then one day I was like, I don't want to do events anymore. I want to do creative things. So I just stopped doing event things, only started sharing creative things. And eventually people were like, oh, he's a creative guy. And then at some point I was doing all these creative projects. I wanted to do more commercial projects. And so I started shifting my entire portfolio to have work that looked more and more commercial, more and more advertising like, more and more editorial, until eventually that became true, until I was getting paid for it. Like before that, I was just sort of paying for it myself. And then one day I decided I wanted to become an environmentalist. Like I wanted to do work that had meaning and purpose behind it. And that was the same thing. I just stopped doing any creative projects that didn't have some meaning or purpose behind it. started doing these environmental projects, most of which were self-funded, until eventually one company came up to me and was like, oh, let's try to do this stuff. And, you know, by the time I was reaching the sculptural phase, it was driven by this realization that as the rise of Instagram was happening, as cameras and pricing of cameras were dropping, the value of photography was diminishing. And that I felt that if I only stuck to doing cool, creative productions, that the cost of productions would actually exceed my ability to generate revenue from it. And I was like, I think the one thing that is really hard to replace in a digital experience are physical experiences. And so there's this desire to move into this physical world. And I think it was kind of the same thing. I just started telling everyone that like I want to make like, instead of doing temporary sets, which is like a photography set, which is only good for like the photo itself, I wanted to do semi-permanent sets that would maybe like last for a couple weeks or a couple months. And I just literally started doing that. So the first project that I ended up doing was, so the first project that I ended up doing was the world's tallest closet. I was invited to do a talk, and we thought it would be really cool in this conference in Egypt to build the world's tallest closet that would fit all the clothes that a single person would wear over the course of their lifetime. And we found a company that would help design and pay for the construction of that, and then we could just dress the whole thing up, find the clothing, find the materials, find the supplies, and like record a video to document that process. The second one that I did ended up being a Guinness World Record art installation made from 168,000 plastic straws. But I still remember, like, this is a project that we came in, all I had were the straws, and we didn't even know how many straws we had. I'd never built an installation with straws. I just kind of like flowed in with this, like the optimism that we would be able to figure it out within a month in a country that I didn't even speak the language in. And so I think I've just generally had this consistent flow of having an idea, just giving it a shot and seeing where it would go. And when people see it, then they believe it. But if you just say, I want to do something, and you're not able to show it, it's a lot harder to convince people otherwise. And so telling people the story of what you can do, I guess, is one big piece of that puzzle. Yeah.
So what brings that inherent trust in the universe? Because it seems that you carry that, okay, let me step into this unknown and things will work out. And many people get stuck in that comfort zone, and you're clearly willing to challenge it. It could be for reasons that you're seeing from a cerebral space that, yeah, photography may not have that much gain in the future, but you're also kind of leaning into things that are not your there you haven't done it before, so you're also still challenging yourself. So what in your personality has such strong belief in the power of the universe and it'll all work out?
I think earlier on it was probably just naive optimism, like not realizing how difficult things are and just genuinely believing that it'll be okay. And that, I still remember really early on in my career as I was doing more of my photography stunts, it was just this idea that even if it failed, it would be a really great story. And the goal is to tell people a good story. There's this like photo shoot that I did, I don't know, way back in 2012. We wanted to light a guy on fire. And he was going to be like, it was a stunt man that was going to be like riding a motorcycle. And I just have this like, I don't know if it's like a 10-minute video of us failing to light this guy on fire properly. And I was like, this is a great story. and even with my, the underwater photo shoot that you referenced, my camera broke like the first day that I went diving with it. And I ended up having to borrow someone else's camera. And that just like was like part of the story. And I think there's just this idea that maybe this is true, especially of art, is that nobody knows what it's supposed to look like, right? Nobody knows what the final result was supposed to be. And when you go to a museum and there's like a little description next to this big piece of art that's like, really poetic and deep and whatever, I think that like those descriptions are written after the project is done. Like I think we just figure out what story we want to tell after the project has been completed. And maybe this is the same in like, I don't know, in a company too. At the end of the day, the story, I think, is what I find to be the most interesting. And when things don't work out, I like to think that, if ever I get on like a TED talk to do a TED main stage talk, it's like, oh, this is the point where shit really hit the fan that will make a really good story arc in the future. There's this frame that I don't remember where this comes from, but like where we choose to start and end a story determines whether or not that story was like a success or a failure, right? Like let's say you get married and the relationship ends, and you end the story, then this is a story of failure, of how you failed the relationship. But if you push the story further and you found a new lover that was like way better than your existing marriage, and this is a story of success, right? So it's like where it's the same story, but where we choose to start and end the story really determines how we remember it and how we share it with other people. And so for me, I think every project is its own story, but it's also part of a larger story. And in that larger story, there is a direction and an intention to lead a happy, meaningful, fulfilling life that feels interesting and exciting. And I think in order to have that, you need to go through sort of the ups and the downs, the trials, the tribulations, the successes, the failures, and just to see what's going to happen. And when you dig, when you look back, then you're like, oh yeah, that was a life worth living, because there were all of these like weird detours and whatnot. Otherwise, it'd make a really boring story if everything was just a straight line.
Yeah, that's interesting. But how did the shift and focus towards ecology happen? Like, was it always present with you and you kind of said, okay, I'm going to dig deeper here. This is what gives me meaning. This is a very specific space that you've chosen, that, I'm going to talk more about what is really happening to the planet. And how did that idea germinate? And then how did you make
Mm.
it grow?
I think for most environmentalists, they grow up like loving nature, having a deep relationship to nature. Maybe they went camping as a kid, maybe they lived on a farm or whatever. I had none of that. I grew up in a city. We weren't really wealthy, and so we didn't have sort of like a weekend cabin that we would go to or anything along those lines. And so my shift into becoming an environmentalist was actually entirely a surprise for me. Basically, by 2015, I was an influencer. I had like 500,000 followers on social media. I generated millions of views. I had a couple large commercial campaigns under my belt, and I was like, I'm bored. Like, like this is cool. I'm doing cool projects, but like, where is it all going? Like, what is driving this desire to do more, bigger, crazier things? There's like nothing that's really the why was getting a little bit boring, right? Like when I first quit my day job, the idea was like, oh, is it possible to pursue your passion? And then the answer is yes, it's possible. And then what? And so I started thinking back on the projects that I was most proud of. And the ones that I always came back to were the ones that had some meaning or purpose behind it. Like there was this one video that I made for a little girl that was dying of a terminal degenerative brain disease. And we ended up raising, I ended up making a video for them that ended up raising $2 million over the course of a year for this rare disease. And I was like, this feels like a really good use of my time and energy. And so I started looking for causes to support with my photography style, which was like fantasy and surreal, kind of dreamy-esque stuff. And that connection was really hard to find initially. And so I started doing a bunch of different small little campaigns around social issues, around environmental issues, just because like I knew that these were issues in the back of my mind, but I had never paid a lot of attention to them. The first climate related project that I ended up doing was going storm chasing to raise awareness for climate change. And so I had watched a documentary to learn a little bit more about climate change, because if you're going to talk about it, you need to understand it. And we thought it would be really cool to team up with a storm chaser, have these big, giant supercells that were brewing and traveling at 50 miles an hour, and then just posing people in front of these big storms and ignoring what was going on behind them. And we called that series like Climate Change Doesn't Care. And I think that was like my first introduction to the climate world, not because I cared especially about the environment. I just knew that this was a big issue that I should be paying attention to, and started looking into it. A second environmental campaign that I did was tying a model underwater with sharks swimming around. So I already knew how to take photos underwater with a model. I was like, oh, why not just tie a model underwater with some sharks swimming around and talk about shark conservation? And so in that project, I started learning about the oceans. I started learning about sharks. I started learning about, keystone species and ecology, and how these different, like how important the ocean is to humanity and to the rest of the world. And then the third project that I ended up doing was because my mom had found a mermaid tail designer, in Montreal. And she's just like, hey, Ben, I found this mermaid tail designer. You might find her interesting. Maybe you guys can work together. And I was like, okay, I really want to work with her. This mermaid tail looks really dope. And I need it to mean something. What are some issues that are affecting the oceans? So if mermaids live in the oceans, oh, this is like oceans and there's plastic. This was right at the time where the Great Pacific Garbage Patch had just been discovered. And so I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had a mermaid lying in an ocean of plastics? And so that's where the series, like A Mermaid on 10,000 Plastic Bottles, came in. And that was my introduction to plastics as an issue. And so like, I just keep doing one project after another. And I started learning more and more about the world. And at some point I'm like, oh crap, I can't unlearn these things, right? You can't unsee these things. And with every little project that you do, you start like shifting the way you move through the world. I went from, being very much a meat eater to becoming vegetarian to eventually becoming vegan. I stopped using, I stopped purchasing single-use bottles, start being really conscious of my consumption. And the entire time I was like, this sucks. Like being an environmentalist really sucks because it just makes you feel guilty for everything, right? Like actually being an environmentalist is very much, I feel, the opposite of influencer culture. Like you want to travel less, you want to consume less, you want to use less, you want people to buy less. And I just started having like this big identity crisis and really struggled with it for a while. But that's sort of how I fell into this world.
Or you can also have another attitude, which is holier than thou. So that's the other
Yeah.
side of some of us, where it is like, okay, you guys need to get it right, which doesn't win you many friends usually. So
No, that doesn't
you
work
gotta be,
either. It doesn't work.
yeah. So you talk about these amazing ideas. Where is that space? Where does it emerge for you? Like, is it just you get into something and they appear? Do you ruminate and how does it evolve? And then the second part of it, how much do you really think of the financial bit? Like, will this succeed? Will this not succeed? Will this get you more interesting kind of followers? Does that connect? Or you just do what you want from wherever the idea emerged and let it all flow from there? How does your spirit work?
Hmm. Okay, so on the collaboration front, I'm very much not the kind of person that goes for a walk and comes out with genius ideas. So I'm not an intrinsically creative person. I'm an extrinsically creative person. And so my creativity actually comes from conversations. So maybe you and I are chatting. You might say something like, oh, have you ever come to India before? We have this big factory with all this like byproduct that we're really not sure what to do with. And it's got this interesting story. And then I'll ask you, okay, like, but like, what is the story there? Who are the people that are affected? What would your theory of change look like? And in the conversation process of us just throwing ideas out, eventually maybe something interesting will emerge. And so that's like kind of the creative half of it. And then there's like the logistical half of it. So we might come up with a great idea and say like, oh, it'd be so cool to create an art installation in space that was made out of recycled stuff. And that would have no possibility of being enacted because none of us is connected to the space industry and, whatever, right? Like there's no practical connection to it. But where it becomes interesting is where the creative conversation, the creative exchange gets paired with a couple different production elements. And so when we think of like moving a project forward, I think very often we focus on the financial piece, right? Like, oh, this is going to cost a lot of money to put together. And that is true. Large physical things take money. But what do you need the money for? You need the money so that you can buy the materials, rent a space, hire the artisans, and so on and so forth. But sometimes you can skip the money piece of it and have access to these other things through collaboration, right? You can find people who are willing to volunteer. You can find companies that want to throw their resources at a thing. You can find space that is empty that maybe a government or a group wants to contribute into, because we have many different forms of capital in the world. And when you have enough of those pieces of capital combined with a really interesting idea, the threshold of financial investment needed it actually just keeps going down depending on how many other resources you have available at your disposal. So I think for me, yes, there's always a practical question like, is this thing possible? But the is this thing possible doesn't exclusively hinge on the financial piece of it. It's much more like, why does this thing need to exist in the world? And who are the people that we need to enroll in order to make this happen? And once we have those pieces, then the final question is like, well, what's missing to make that happen? And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's something else. And I don't know. I think the other thing that I also have is like patience. Ideas sometimes take months, years, just in the same way that relationships take time to develop. And I think money is very often used as a lubricant to get things done quickly and on time. And so the world largely operates on a chronological time frame, right? We have hourly rates, quarterly returns, all these different deadlines that need to be hit. And I think many of my projects and my entire life in general operates more on like serendipitous time. The right place at the right time with the right people, where all the stars just align. Let's make it work, right? And so there's, it's not that I don't have projects that are time bound. There are also those time bound projects. But I largely operate on a serendipitous time model where I try to figure out how do we just get the right elements in the room and just be attuned to what's possible. And I think that's specifically because I don't have an infinite amount of wealth, right? So I can't throw money at a problem to solve it. I don't have a very strong business model underpinning these projects. I feel very excited when I don't lose money on a project. And I think that this way of operating in the world has created a really rich collaborative life because you depend on other people, you depend on relationships, you need to nurture them and build them in order for projects to happen.
I was talking to a coach of mine, and he talked about how every communication, and he used a Hindi word, and I don't know how to translate it. It's called tapas, which is like heat. Like you're either
Mm,
dissipating heat or creating heat, and it's multiple kind of reverberations of heat that will
mm,
happen. So you are trying to see, and then every relationship is, in Hindi, it's called yagna, or it's a fire ceremony, where you are putting different things into the fire to make it grow bigger or dissolve it. So it's interesting that you talk about
mm,
communication and relationships. And it was just yesterday that I was ruminating on this idea that, what does it really mean? And because I've been really bad sometimes, and I think bad, okay, bad is a difficult word, but it's been difficult for me because I think we all carry a little bit of our childhood and the way our parents kind of interacted. And I found that a lot of my styles in communications are kind of pushback, okay?
mm,
You know, yeah, there is an ego that comes in. And I've worked on it for years, but it still kind of crops up, these things
mm.
run deep. And it's interesting that you talk about relationships. So I'm going to take that with me because it's a good thing coming back to me again and again. We would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Good Garbage is sponsored by Paka, a family of brands that produces compostable packaging and works to implement regenerative solutions. Paka's new project is to bring compostable food serviceware and food carry products to the North American marketplace. Learn more at paka.com. Now back to the conversation. But I was also going to switch to each of these amazing works that you've created. And I wanted to understand your thinking behind some of them. And you can mention more than what I will have. But, I looked at and saw this whole idea of a tap and, the truckloads of plastic flowing into the ocean. It is. Oh, there you go. So talk to me a little more about, like how that happened. And of course, it's such a great example of a visual impact. But talk to me
Mm.
more about your thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, I think very early on, as I became more and more of an activist, I really wanted the work to be more than just art. And so this idea of visualizing data is something that I really wanted to touch upon. And sometimes the data is like soft data; it doesn't have to be hard data, right? Like so, in this one over here, you're probably familiar with the statistic that less than 10% of plastics is recycled globally, right? And so that's the emotion that we want to convey. And so here we have a giant faucet inside of a recycling plant, and less than 10% of it is being recycled. There's a little stream that's getting like falling onto this recycling line, and there's this tiny little recycling bin over here that we're trying to catch this unending flow of plastics that's flowing. And the structure itself is also really trying to get to the sentence that, like, we need to turn off the plastic tap, meaning we need to go straight to the source. We need to figure out how to stop producing so much waste if we want to stand a chance at actually stopping it. And so like I'm taking things that are like very much part of the lexicon of a movement itself. I'm taking real world things and I'm using that to inspire the art itself, so that when scientists, policymakers, activist groups want to communicate something, that this work can hopefully be in service of the movement itself. I think very often art can sometimes be something that is, I think, by definition, selfish. Like, what do I want to create in the world? What do I want to burden? What am I feeling? And I think for me, I see art as a technology that we can use to solve a communication problem, right? So I view my art, I view my art, my artistic process. My artistic process is closer to that of a designer rather than that of an artist. It's trying to understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and how can the art that I create, my skills, my style, contribute to that. And if it isn't going to contribute, then I don't really feel the urge or the need to create it, because then it just feels like a waste of energy and effort.
You mentioned the straw apocalypse. I've been trying to say this
Yeah.
word for a bit. And of course, this was the largest supported art installation made from drinking straws. And of course, we understand the idea of straws, but here I would like to ask you how you exactly, it's such a beautiful piece, Ben. It's stunning. I definitely urge all listeners to see it, those who are not watching this conversation. So I wanted to understand here about how you felt it actually moved people. Did you feel that, the storytelling through art was actually having the impact that you wanted? And how did you manage to kind of, did you feel satisfied with that impact?
Did I feel satisfied? I think I never satisfied, but when are we ever? The no, this art installation, what it was really trying to say was how small little individual actions add up. And so, like, one straw in and of itself, of course, doesn't feel like much, but when you see all of it amalgamated together, I think it really, this structure was like 10 feet tall, 10 feet deep, and so you could really just feel yourself walking through this tunnel of straws that were wrapping you around, just like the what the volumetric significance of this could feel like. I mean, we did go around with and like did a survey of different people just to see, like, did it change their opinion? How did they feel? Did it shift them? And I don't know, it's like 83% of people felt like they viewed the problem in a different way. But I know I spent a good chunk of my earlier career as an activist really trying to measure impact. I had in my mind that if we could, like, objectively measure impact, then we could sell the impact to a company or something like that. And after trying to do that for a couple years, I kind of came to the conclusion that it was asking the wrong question. I think asking the question is like, what is the impact of art, is very much similar to, like, trying to come up with a set of KPIs to ask you how much you loved your kids. Is it the number of hours spent? Is it the number of dollars spent? Is it the minutes per day of eye contact given? It's like, sure, you can come up with all these indicators, but I don't think you really get to the essence of what, like, love actually is. And so rather than wasting my energy trying to measure something that is intangible, I thought it would just be better to focus my energy on making the project as good as it possibly can be. So, like, being an artist and doing the good art, and then of course being critical along the way and seeing, like, oh, what could make this better, but not needing to, like, get down to the wire to, like, measure it. The other thing that I think I realized is that very often a lot of these impact reports are a little they're self-serving. They're just stories that people are trying to tell to tell a story to their higher ups on why this is, like, self-justifying. But, like, when we think of like change in you, like, you're talking about, like, you're trying to change the way you communicate with people, your communication style, that change is not measured the same way like ice turns to water. It's not like this one inflection point in time. I am one person, I'm suddenly another person, and I see the world in a different way. It's something that happens, like, gradually. Most of it is invisible. It's these invisible nudges that help shift us slowly but surely in the same direction. And I think I've just started to see my work as that. I am contributing to a movement that is shifting people, that is reminding people, that is opening up their hearts and minds, connecting different dots here and there. And it might work differently for different people at different parts of their journey, sometimes more visible, sometimes not. But it is not my job singularly as an artist to change the hearts and minds of the entire world. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, I think that's just like a very like egocentric way of doing it. And so I like to think of my work as participating in the general ecology of change. And I'm doing the best that I can do by trying to tell meaningful stories, visuals, videos that all wrap into the same movement. And so I think I've just really stopped centering myself in the story as much, and really just trusting and having faith and hearing through the ripples, and tweaking and refining and improving, rather than needing to control.
How many Instagram followers do you have now?
I don't know. So I don't really consider myself an influencer anymore, because I only
Okay.
post when I have projects. I don't chase the algorithm, but I think I'm at like 120,000 followers on Instagram. I had 350,000 followers on Facebook, but I don't really post on Facebook any longer. Um, yeah.
And the reason I ask this is exactly what you were saying in the last statement. You kind of seem to have taken yourself away from that influencer syndrome, right? Where you're constantly trying to kind of see what the others are feeling. So this shift is a big one. And was it a natural shift for you, or did you get out of that syndrome kicking and screaming? Because I many times see influencers and they're constantly trying to kind of put up a kind of face that others would like, which is really different from what you are saying. It's more internal work than external justification, or people trying to give you a thumbs up. So that's not something that's motivating you anymore. So how did that happen?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like to think about is like, people often think of careers, like what do you want to do in life? And I think about time. Like, I'm like, how do I want to spend my time? And it became pretty clear, I don't know, as I was shifting more and more into becoming an activist, that I didn't want to be spending my time being a character in my own life, like taking my life, packaging it, and making it into a product for other people to enjoy. I really wanted to actually figure out how to have a life that I enjoyed living myself. And so I think the shift was gradual, but when you start learning something new, so in my case I started diving deeper and deeper into like the environmental movement, you also start realizing that the world is complicated and that you don't have all the answers. And I think being an influencer very often is about having the answers, telling people what to think. You're sort of a thought leader in the space. And I realize that I think I'm just a person who has a lot of questions. I don't have the answers. I don't always know. I don't always need to know. And so in that instance, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be influencing if I don't really know for sure. And so I speak when I have something to say, and if I don't have anything to say, I'm quiet. And 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 I feel like it's really hard for influencers, because their entire livelihoods depend on this hamster wheel that they've constructed for themselves, where they become the product, and the people that they know, the industries they're a part of, the work that they create, the perks that they get, are all built on this very fragile pyramid that they don't actually even control, because the algorithms are constantly changing, technology is constantly shifting, the desires of the consumer, if we'll call it that, the attention economy is constantly morphing, and you end up having to keep up with that pace of change or die. And I think I just feel really grateful that I have been able to kind of sidestep that, because the work that I do has always been about doing fewer, larger things. And one of the big realizations that I've had with my work is that I don't need to be an influencer to get my work seen if I just create work that is really meaningful and relevant where press and media already is. And so my current focus, which has been very much around doing large scale art installations at multilateral treaty negotiations whenever it's possible, just means that I'm going to where press and media are already gathering to cover world events, and I'm making it more interesting by building these large symbolic visuals. The art is actually getting shared without my consent, without my control, but I've sort of like abdicated control, and just letting the art serve people. Sometimes I get credited for it, sometimes I don't. But that's not the important piece. The important piece is that I'm doing work that is meaningful, that is contributing to the conversation, and that I'm somehow able to convince just enough people to continue doing the work. Just enough money, just enough collaborations, just enough contributions from different people in order to make the project possible. And that's ultimately what matters.
Has there been any specific spiritual slash inner work that has guided this shift and movement in you?
As an environmentalist, and I don't know how many of your listeners are environmentalists, but as an environmentalist or an activist or someone who cares about the world, I think there is this constant pressure that nothing we do is ever enough, because you're looking at the rate of decline or the rate of destruction that is happening in the world, and you're like, oh my gosh, like if I don't drop everything that I'm doing in order to help the world, then I'm a terrible person, right? Because there are so many people that are less fortunate than you, and this and that and the other, and you're like, oh, I need to leverage my privilege, try the best I can, da da da. And it's funny because we can criticize sort of the construct of capitalism for never being satisfied. It's basically saying we need more power, more wealth, more accumulation, more stuff, more things. And as activists, we take that same thing and we just flip it on its head, where we're like, I need to have more impact, I need to affect more people, I need to affect, and you put all that pressure into that same infinite growth is sort of having this shadow side on our own personal mental health and well-being. And so if you're coming at the work from a place of duty, then everything is going to feel like a burden. And the shift that has been quite impactful for me over the last couple of years has been trying to shift from like a fuel of burden and duty to one of like love and care. So once again, if we go back to the example of a father with their kids, if you see your kids as a burden, then everything is going to be challenging. It's going to be expensive. You're not going to get a lot of sleep. It's going to be very emotionally draining and this and that, and the other. But if you come at it from a place of love, then you're like, oh, this is like my privilege, my honor to like lean into this. What a beautiful opportunity that I have to like be in a position to nurture a brand new mind and like care for it and so on and so forth. And so I've been trying to work on that relationship relative to nature and to my activism, to come at the work from a place of love rather than one of duty. And then to also ask the question of like, how much is enough? Right? And it isn't just like how much is enough success, but also how much is like enough impact, how much is enough money? Like, when do we have enough, and why do we need that? Why do we need that? Like, what does enough look like? What does it feel like? And I think for me, I realized that, so my core values, I have three like core values. Curiosity and adventure. I love being able to try new things and explore. There's growth and transformation. I love learning, I love growing internally, but I also want to change the world, right? So I want to be curious, I want to adventure for the purpose of growing and transforming myself, the world around me, and I want to do both of that in a way that feels like kind and authentic to myself, not at the expense of anyone, not at the expense of myself. And so in order to do that, I need to have enough money that enables me to learn, to travel, and to create. And I need enough, not just financial capital, but social capital, cultural capital, intellectual capital, right? And do I have the capacity to nurture all of those things? And I realized that actually, while I might not be the richest person in the world, I do have enough to do all of those things. And that's what matters. And, you asked a little bit earlier, like, was the impact enough? I don't think the impact is ever going to be enough, because if the goal is to reverse the damage and shift us from a net negative civilization to a net positive civilization for all people in the planet, then nothing I do as a single individual artist will ever be enough. But of course not. It's kind of absurd to think that one day I'm going to create a piece of art that's going to change global consciousness and shift us away from like that. That would be an egomaniac speaking if he truly believed that. And so I think there is like enough is really like both trying your best, but also just being aware of like what role you can play in the ecology. And so like for me right now, if I'm saying I'm creating art at the work that I'm focusing on, art at multilateral treaty negotiations that are getting seen by millions of people who are the decision makers in positions of power, and that I am one of the loudest voices, at least within plastics, from a visual perspective, that's contributing. I'm like, I feel like that's enough, right? Like, it's not changing anything single-handedly, but it is really operating at a level that feels proportional to the privilege and skill and connections and resources that I have available at my disposal. And as long as I can keep leaning into that and trying my best, then that should be enough. And so, yeah, I've been doing a lot of work. So it's not really a spiritual practice as much as it is just this really this deep questioning of like, what are you really looking for in this one chance at creating a life worth living for yourself look like?
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I was reading another very interesting text. It's called, they're different sutras, they call it in India, which are
Mm,
basically keys, like keys to wisdom. And this was Shiva, so Shiva's sutra. And it was all about we are creating our own reality always.
mm-hmm,
And it's not just this lifetime, it's multiple lifetimes. And the key is exactly what you kind of were saying, is that how do you drop all attachment to whether it's result or this is what I want to be, even the attachment to I want to be kind, or I want to be this, so how do you drop that as well? So the idea is that in order to merge into the eternity, the key is to drop. And that's kind of
mm,
what you were in your own way kind of inferring to, am I really going to
mm.
change this world? No, but am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Yes. And so that's what creates the beautiful kind of reality. And I'm going to switch again to something more temporal and talk about the electronic waste idea. You created this beautiful sculpture with the Bitcoin mining idea, and that connects with your mining background too. So the damage there, and oh yeah, exactly. There you go, the skull. Yeah, so tell us more about that, and what was again the purpose.
Yeah, so this was a project that I created in collaboration with Greenpeace. Greenpeace was running a campaign to talk about the energy consumption of Bitcoin mining. And it's funny because this campaign was happening pre-AI. And it's funny because right now the energy consumption of AI data centers is making the energy consumption of Bitcoin look like peanuts. But at the time, this was like a really big conversation because cryptocurrencies were getting all of the limelight. And I met this guy while on a trip in Greenland with a bunch of cryptocurrency people that were trying to figure out how to put cryptocurrencies and blockchain at the service of environmental issues. And they were trying to find a way of creating a mascot or a symbol that would be more interesting than stock images that were normally used on the covers of these campaigns when you talk about something abstract like Bitcoin mining. And so we ended up creating a giant skull covered in electronic waste with coal smokestacks coming up because there were stories of coal power plants reopening in order to power Bitcoin mining rigs. And it was funny because creating this campaign it was a very controversial campaign. The people on the Bitcoin side were really angry. The Greenpeace people were saying that all the Bitcoin optimism around how Bitcoin was a really green technology was kind of bullshit. And the two of them were just really in opposition to one another. But what the art installation actually did, what it actually created, was the first thing that both sides could agree upon, which is that the art was awesome and that environment was something that both sides cared about. Like there was a sector of them that both sides cared about, and it became this really interesting confluence where the Bitcoiners ended up taking the symbol and adopting it as a symbol of why Bitcoin was awesome and could be used for environmental issues to protect the environment. And Greenpeace was also using it to talk about the energy consumption of Bitcoin and saying, hey, if Bitcoin, like we think Bitcoin is an awesome technology, is there a way to make it more environmentally sustainable? Ultimately, Greenpeace ended up dropping the campaign. There's a huge lawsuit against them right now. And so all available resources got redirected. But the skull ended up getting purchased and donated to the Bitcoin Museum that's in Nashville. And so now it's kind of become part of the central history of Bitcoin because it was such a contradictory flashpoint in the culture at that moment in time. So it's another one of those projects that happened. I earned really little money doing the project, but somehow because it got purchased, I ended up making money, which is like really great. But it's just one of those like ebbs and flows of these projects where you just never know where they're going to lead.
I'm looking for a little education from you now. So what
Yes.
happens is that a lot of these pieces are, of course, showing reality and telling a story in its own way. but it's also generating a certain amount of fear, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
like you face reality with that tap, with that straw, and with the electronic waste, and what is happening. And then I also hear this other side, that how do you switch that into something that's uplifting? How do you see it? Do you see that as kind of stark is better and that kind of motivates people to do more? Or sugarcoating could be a way to do it? Or is there a way to flip that and say that, okay, if we did this kind of idea, because I keep trying to tell our teams, for example, to not do any plastic shaming. I say, because my thinking is that, 80 years back, there were some humans who found these waste materials like the styrenes and the ethylenes and propylenes, and they converted it to something that changed the very way we live. Of course, they probably didn't have it in mind that, this is going to have this crazy downside where there's no recycling, there's downcycling, and it never gets out of that loop.
Hmm.
But presumably that wasn't their intent. So, what I feel is that ultimately it's within us to transform that. How do you transform that into a material that is going to be more aligned to what we need for the future? So I keep debating in within the organization that how do we move away from saying no to this to saying, oh, we are going to do this to kind of transform the space. Do you see what I mean? And then I'd love to hear your kind of thought process around that idea.
Yeah, no, I think your question is so perfect because it fully encapsulates the current challenge that I feel around my work actually is that most of my work highlights what's wrong with the world, because it is so much easier to talk about what's wrong with the world rather than talking about what's potentially right with the world. Transitions, alternatives, are challenging because they don't always work in every situation and they generally aren't perfect, right? Like they have some level of downsides to them. And so when we talk about problems, they're very easy because everyone can agree that this is like this big, gigantic, annoying thing. But to your point, one of the things that has felt increasingly true to me, and another reason why I started getting involved in multilateral treaty negotiation work, is that like I mean, go outside and survey 100 people, and 99 of them will say that yes, plastics is a problem, right? Like literally the whole world knows that plastic is a problem. And so if you create a piece of art to highlight how plastics is a really big problem, then you're just raising more frustration. You're not just raising awareness; you're raising frustration. You just keep reminding people that this is a problem. This is a problem that's growing, and this is a problem that we as a society seems incapable of actually resolving. And that's one of the things that I have found so frustrating about my work and about the environmental movement writ large, is that the problems keep getting worse every single year that goes on, despite a number of different cool alternatives that are slowly coming into market, whether there's like PHA alternatives, compostables, so on and so forth. But they have not been widely adopted at the scale that we need it to. And even then, we would only be focusing on like the tiny percentage of like, I don't know, consumer packaged goods, right? There's like so many other utilizations of plastics. I think of the world as like there are like three horizons to work towards, and we need to figure out how to do them simultaneously. There's the first horizon, which is like, what are the most egregious harms that are currently affecting our current society that we really need to like control and reduce? And the way that I am trying to do that is through like policy. I think policy is a really effective tool if you can actually leverage it either at the local or national or international level, right? Like policy really helps to regulate, creates constraints around capitalism, it levels the playing field for competitors, and it gives a boost to those that are coming up with alternatives, right? So Horizon 1 needs to be worked on. Then there's Horizon 2, transitionary technologies. So I think I think a lot of the PHAs, like alternative, sort of greener tech, single-use goods, for example, are a really great transitionary piece. But ultimately, we really want to figure out how to just use less stuff, right? Like you can't just take all the waste and like transform it into a different form of waste and hope that fixes everything. We still live on a finite planet with finite resources, and if everyone just uses more and more stuff, which uses more and more energy, which uses more and more materials, and we're only in this more and more and more trend. At some point, that whole system breaks down, right? So we need to also think about Horizon 3, which is like, what is the ultimate new society that we want to build and design that will work for all people on the planet, where we can become a net positive for not just this generation, but all future generations to come. And we need to somehow figure out how to do Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 work at the same time. My work, I think, is centered really on the Horizon 1 front, trying to like reduce damage. I'm hoping to do more work in Horizon 2 and Horizon 3 work. It seems like you're focused mostly on like Horizon 2 stuff. How do we transition out of the most egregious harms into something a little bit better? And then I also want to start playing around in Horizon 3 stuff, and I'm not entirely sure how to get there. But I think all three are necessary. We need both the urgency, but we also need the hope. You can't just have urgency like the forest is burning and not tell people where to go. Like your house is burning, stay inside. Like that's not going to work, right? And I think that sometimes a lot of the activist groups only focus on that first part, which is letting everyone know that the house is burning and not telling them where to go.
Yeah, what we realized a while back is that, you know, habit change wasn't in our control. In a way, what you are influencing is also habits. You don't need to use
Yep.
that straw. You don't need to kind of pick up that cup and, all your installations kind of inspired that. And we realized that what can we do about this? And we said, okay, if we change the material to be something that is at least not going to harm the planet when it's thrown away, then that's a good thing. But similar to what you're saying, what we realize is that end of the day, if all we are doing is increasing consumption because of that, then we are actually not doing right by the bigger goal, because ultimately there is no such thing as what they call eco-friendly industry, right? That it's an
Mm-hmm.
oxymoron because it doesn't go together, because as soon as you are an industry, you're going to use some energy, you're going to use materials, you're going to transport, you're going to use a lot of water, etc., etc., etc. So when I look at nature, for example, and packaging there, it's so amazing. Everything grows with the material inside, and it's based out of amino acids or carbohydrates, which is sugars or proteins, and very small piece of all chemistry is water, all energy is the sun. So, for me, of course, that's the inspiration, that how does one transition towards learning from all that is around us. And it's such beautiful packaging. You never find an orange inside a banana, and it gives you an expiry date, and all of that. And I have no idea, Ben, how we are going to kind of learn and be able to not just create materials like that, but also processes like that, because you have these huge redwoods, and all they are doing is carbon sequestration, and it's just carbon from the air and a little water from within, and you get these huge cellulosic structures which we then cut down and mash it up and remove all the stuff and create paper or furniture or whatever. So it's a funny kind of juxtaposition, where you have such amazing processes as well as products around you. But then the challenge becomes for people like us, how do you learn and adopt that? So, how would you see that from an artist standpoint? That, like, how does one flip into that second mode and create stuff that can inspire? Because if it's too abstract, because yours is very real, so it hits hard. But then again, on the second side, if you, on your second horizon, if you make it too abstract, it's not going to have meaning. So give me some ideas on, if you can come up with something. I'm sure you'll come up with something. But if
Uh,
there are things, how would you do that? How would you explore that side of Horizon Two?
I mean, I think it's a really challenging one. I can give you one example of a project that I've done, but like this is definitely something that I want to explore more, and I think it's going to be through conversations with other people who are thinking about this. I created this art installation to highlight the carbon footprint of the average person produced every single year. It's made
Nice,
from a
yeah.
material called biochar. So
Oh yeah.
biochar is responsible for 89% of verified carbon removal credits. And this piece specifically was made with bamboo biochar that we actually produced. And so while it does highlight the magnitude of the problem, it also highlights the magnitude of the potential solution, right? Like this indigenous technology that has existed for thousands of years, which basically takes organic material, burns it in a low oxygen environment, stabilizes the organic waste into carbon so that it doesn't degrade into methane, and then you can lock it up in the soil. It acts as a soil remediation piece of technology. And so you're taking this this story of a material um, that is very much, it's not going to single-handedly solve the climate issue, but it is contributing to like rehabilitating the soil, stewarding the land, and slowing climate change all at the same time. And so it feels like a really interesting story. And the reason that we had this giant bird kind of coming up is because we thought it was very similar to the story of the phoenix, a phoenix rising from the ashes, right? You're taking fire, you're harnessing it, and you're allowing the ground to like be reborn. So that's just an example of a project that I did where I think that falls a little bit more into the Horizon 2 world of things. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. A couple new projects that I have on the horizon that, are not sure by any means. Some have been in conversations for years. One has been like trying to figure out how to reconnect our culture to nature in ways that maybe were true pre-colonization era. Feels like a way of like returning back to a different orientation towards the planet. Feels somewhat interesting as like a cultural shift. And then also I've been thinking about collaborating with different land remediation, large scale land remediation projects, which are finding ways of rehabilitating old degraded land like quarries or mine sites, and seeing the opportunity there and adding art into that story and that mixture. But these are all very different stories. And so I don't know if you have any ideas. I think it would be really interesting just to have conversations, because ultimately I think it's through these conversations that the metaphors are born, that become interesting. I think one of the really cool things about bringing folks together to talk about art is that it gives everyone permission to be like silly and expansive. Like if you brought your entire team together and said like, hey, let's try to create a marketing campaign around this product, they're going to think in a very like strategic, siloed way. But if you said like, hey guys, I want to create some big art thing that encapsulates the essence of like what our mission is and what we're hoping to envision in the future, like no one really knows what that means. And so that just kind of gives everyone a little bit of permission to like to explore and dream really big and weird and interestingly. And then you find ways of like through that conversation and that exploratory process to figure out like, oh, what is the story here that we haven't actually thought about that is possible, that I think can be really interesting. So I don't know. I think this is an exercise that'd be really interesting for you to take back to your team and just see like what exactly emerges from there, from that kind of a conversation. Imagine you were going to create something in the style of Ben von Wong at the next big climate conference. What is a story that we'd want to tell, and how would we do that? Like what shape would you think about? Maybe there's something in like Sanskrit scriptures that you're like, oh, there's this story of recreation, of death and rebirth that I think would be perfect for this story that we would like to tell, and that you would never think about if you're trying to do marketing, because it would be so limited. So I don't know.
I'm definitely taking that away with me. There will be some ideas that will emerge, and I will definitely love to
Fun.
jostle with you and see what emerges. So yeah. So
Cool.
there is. I'm sure there are things that are going to emerge from there. What are your biggest challenges?
My biggest challenges? I don't know if it's a challenge per se. The search is always for the right people at the right place at the right time. People who not only people who just want to co-create together and play. I think the thing that I like to look for are folks that want to explore creationships together. So I have a lot of friendships. I have a lot of people I can talk to about big ideas. But I think like ultimately the creationships are the interesting ones, and finding the right balance of folks who have ideas and folks who have resources actually kind of matters, because if you only have people with ideas and no resources, then you can't do anything. So it's this dance of trying to figure out all of those, and then also thinking about like trying to do projects at the right place at the right time with the right people. So sometimes I think there's a desire to just do the thing. And I get that. Like I also fall into that mode of saying, oh, that's so cool, let's do it. But why? Like, but what happens if it's successful? I think is always like a really big question to explore that I don't think we always want to answer. So yeah, probably that.
What is the next big project that is most exciting for you?
Nothing is certain right now. I think I'm waiting to see what happens to the global plastic treaty negotiations to see if I want to keep tracking that and contributing to it. The challenge is they never announce where things are going to happen very far in advance. So you kind of have to scramble to raise funds and get partners and create the projects. There is a COP17 on desertification happening in Mongolia next year that I'm kind of curious about. I think it's a topic that I haven't yet tackled, and one that I'm quite curious about exploring. It's also a great excuse to visit Mongolia. There's COP31, which will be happening next year, although it's unsure where it's going to be. I think it's either between Turkey, Germany, and Australia, and the countries are currently competing against each other. Australia would be the ideal one, because if Australia and the Pacific Island nations co-host it, that means that the theme of the COP will be an ocean COP, and I have some concepts that I want to push forward there. And then otherwise, it's the two other projects that I mentioned. Sort of one would be, I don't know, this is a little of a long story, but I recently met someone in a monastery in France who's from Ireland, and she was telling me the story that, like, in the past, every single village used to have a sacred tree. And when the English came in and colonized Ireland, what they would do is they would come in, cut down the sacred tree, and build a church on top of it. And that's how they just slowly took over the culture in the country. And that it would be really interesting to bring back this concept of a holy tree with a church, like, sort of what would a church of the tree look like, and what kind of art creation around this might be interesting to explore. So that's a project that I have been thinking about, that I would like to participate in if we get all the elements ongoing. And then there's this other land remediation project that I'm curious about. That's in Barbados. That would be fun to explore. But otherwise, it's just lots of conversations with different people. I make money generally from a combination of consulting work and speaking engagements. And then the art itself doesn't always pay, but I've started, like, I have a fiscal sponsor, so I have like a nonprofit entity where I continuously raise funds from my different speaking engagements from high net worth individuals that want to support this kind of like non-traditional way of impact and storytelling. So that's sort of a broad picture of like what I have ongoing working, but everything is just dependent on meeting the right people and figuring out what happens next.
And I'm sure the universe has a plan of the movement, as you've been talking about. So if you look at
Usually.
how do you want the people to remember the message, or what is the impact that you would ideally like to have on people who see your amazing artwork?
Honestly, I don't really think that's up to me. The art is out in the world, and I don't know how it impacts you would be different than how it impacts Alex, and how it impacts the different listeners. What I would invite people to do is actually check out the videos. Every single project has a video that shows how it was done, who we collaborated with, and why it was created. And I think it gives a little bit of backstory and depth to the entire project and the people that we had engaged. And along the way, I think that'll give you a better sense of the thing itself, and it'll give you a different connection to the problem.
And that takes me to my final question. What does good garbage mean to you?
Good garbage. I think good garbage is garbage that is like compost. It transitions from a net negative into a net positive. It's like the garbage, like a garbage relationship can become fertile soil for a healthy one to come in the near future because of all the lessons and learnings that were there. And so I think good garbage is garbage that becomes a net positive.
Thank you, Ben. This has been such a wonderful conversation on many levels. I'm just excited
Yeah.
to see how, how you're going to keep, because it's clear to me through this conversation that you're constantly learning and evolving and ready to challenge the status quo. So it'll be beautiful to see how Ben's art evolves and forms evolve. And of course, how you deliver the message and make the world more aware of what is happening. So thank you for your work. Thank you for giving us this time. It has been such a joyful conversation for me. So thank you so much for being here on the show.
Thank you for taking the time, for chasing after me to be on the show.